Hello.
Hello.
All right. It's been a long time. We've been like two months
Yeah,
out of the
back
game.
together.
Yeah. So we've got a lot to talk about. Okay. So I guess first maybe let's talk about why we've been away for 2 months. Um, so um, so there was like a few weeks where one or the other of us was unavailable, and then my laptop bricked, and basically I've been like unable to stream for the last month or so because of that, and so now I am on a brand new PC, and so. Hopefully, I've also switched to OBS. Hopefully, I will have a better setup, a better audio. Like, I don't actually love this camera angle because I feel like I haven't yet figured out how to like get a decent face close up with this. But this is what we're going with for now. I'm like
We'll do it live.
we'll do it live. I'm sitting on my bed. Maybe better camera angle next week. But we've at least got like a decent looking stream here. Hopefully better audio than I had before. Hopefully not a shit ton of fan noise. Um, okay, now next up, you were like at the end of November, beginning of December. Went and did the canvassing thing in Georgia, right?
Yeah. These last 2 months, I was doing like a full week of travel for Thanksgiving stuff. I was going to visit family elsewhere. Then I didn't even come home. I just went straight on a flight to Georgia. I was there for a week for the DGG canvassing stuff, and I also did Progress Libs. Is another group that was running canvassing. I was there for like an extra 2 days before and after where DGG canvassing was happening. So I spent those like four total extra days working with them. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was it was an awesome event. We won, so yeah, I mean, it couldn't have been that bad, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, it was a ton of fun. Super rewarding. Cool to meet everyone. And yeah, highly recommend anyone else who is thinking about doing these kinds of things to go get involved because it was a really eye-opening experience as well.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe you would even want to do more stuff like that in the future if another
Oh
opportunity.
yeah.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so then next up, our planned topic for today is like World War II propaganda videos.
Yep.
Um, and a friend of mine suggested this. He watched one of our streams and he was like basically surprised at how like this is a person who I've like argued with a lot, right? So then he watches one of my streams and he was like this is the most like friendly and agreeable I've ever seen you. So
Hmm.
I think it was the one where we were watching like JJ McCulloch or whatever, and
Oh yeah.
which was a video we picked. This is somebody that I think you're a fan of, right? And we picked
Yeah.
like material that we knew we were gonna enjoy watching, and then we had mostly positive stuff to say about it. Um, but like basically the result of that was this like uh, I don't know. I mean, I like doing streams like that on stuff that we're positive about, but my friend kind of requested that we might do something that we could have a little more problems with and fight with a lot. And I was telling him, I'm like, well, my co-host and I like tend to get along with each other pretty well. We don't fight a lot. So basically the his conclusion was, okay, well then you need to fight with the content that you're doing, and I don't want to do that all the time, but I'm willing to do it occasionally. So
Oh yeah.
so
It's definitely nice to go react to like a Matt Walsh video sometimes and just be like, oh God, I hate everything.
yeah. And so what we're doing today is we're doing like those like racist propaganda videos from World War II, basically. So
Hmm.
there's one on Germany and there's one on Japan. So have you got the links to
Yep,
those?
I've got them pulled up right here. Let me just enable my layout here. Sorry, I've still am a little sick from the previous weeks. I don't know if I mentioned this before, so I'm a little under the weather right now, just as a heads up. But
Oh, okay.
I'm on like I think I'm on like the final day of feeling bad. So hoping to God that I'll be good to go going forward. Of course, I say that I am driving for like 13 hours tomorrow, starting at 6 a.m. So I don't know if that's gonna put a dent in my recovery or what, but we'll see.
Okay. Um, and yeah, oh, and I think you're on a new PC as well, right?
No, not quite. I haven't gotten an opportunity. These past 2 months have just been nothing but a blur. I got home from Georgia. I had immediately hopped into holiday mode with my family again, and then I've been basically sick since like just a couple days after the end of Christmas. So I've still got my new PC in a box downstairs, and I'm working on getting a whole nice setup and everything. I'm gonna even get a camera, hoping to God and stuff like that. But hopefully, at the very least, next week I will be on that new PC, and then the week after that, I'm hoping to have my camera at the latest.
Yeah, so this was something I was anticipating that maybe we were going to get a chance to talk about today, because like I've only ever known you as a talking llama, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's everybody on Twitch, right? None of us have ever like seen your face or anything,
I think you can catch a glimpse of me in the Destiny's canvassing video, although I guess you don't know who I would be in there, but
yeah,
I guess
had
that's
no
a
idea.
bonus for anyone who wants to go.
I actually did watch the video, and I had in mind, Flowtrace was there. If I happen to recognize his voice, maybe I'll keep an eye. But I didn't.
No, I don't think I was talking, but no, I was in the background of him arguing with the guy about the schooling stuff at the very beginning of the video.
Oh, okay.
It's very much like there's like that meme of SpongeBob being like, I was in this famous picture, and it's like a corner of his head. Like I think I'm in frame for like one shot. But
the camera like zooms past you or something like that. Right? Yeah. Okay. So here, let me go back to Discord here, and we'll watch this, and let me double check that the stream looks okay, and I think it does. So I'm ready to go whenever you are.
Jesus.
Oh, the sound is actually very quiet for me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Is it really loud for you? Or?
Problem now is repeat. That is your job.
Yeah, this is actually still very quiet for me. I don't know.
Sorry, what was that?
The audio is still like very quiet for me.
Okay, here I can turn it up, but I'm really hold on. I think I can. Can I turn it up in the applications here and then turn down my own?
Oh, you know what? I think I can turn up the. You know what it was? Okay, I just realized I did a fresh installation of Discord, and so it has all my streams turned down and stuff. And so actually, it's my fault because I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
All
sorry.
right. No, that's good. All right. Here, let me.
Germany, you can lay the groundwork of a
How's that?
could last forever.
It's better, and then I'll crank it up on top.
You could lay the groundwork for a new war to come.
Okay, I think we're good.
And
Thank
just
you.
as American soldiers had to do this job 26 years ago, so other American soldiers, your sons, might have to do it again another 20-odd years from now. Germany today appears to be beaten. Hitler.
Specifically, that idea I think is a very prevalent one that was very prevalent at the time that a lot of people don't appreciate now. Is there's a big attitude where it's like, man, is this going to happen again in like 10, 20 years? Is Europe just going to get torn up? Specifically with the Soviets, there was a real there was very much real planning and preparation put into the possibility of a ground war with the Soviets very early on between the West and And the Soviets, I mean, even right up to, the race to get to Berlin so that there was a West Berlin in the first place was kind of an acknowledgement by the Allies that, yeah, we don't know how long this is exactly going to last. A really interesting anecdote about this, or sort of anecdote about the consequences of this, is that a lot of our history about how the Eastern Front went in World War II was really inaccurate for a long time, because we just wholesale took the word of a bunch of, like, basically former German generals that we had captured and been like, hey, what happened? And in that retelling, there was some shifting of blame. There was an attitude very much of, oh, we never stood a chance against the Soviets. It was just nothing but, hordes of Asiatic hordes is sometimes how they were described. And a lot of that wasn't corrected until the 90s when the Soviet archives were opened. And there were a lot of discrepancies where Western military history had just been the word of some German generals, and we had never even attempted to get the other perspective on it. Just a cool sort of anecdote about what are the consequences of that was.
Yeah, and to add on to the first thing you were saying about that they were worried that this might happen again, I think it's very understandable because they had just had another world war, like 20 years before this, or less than 20 years, but so I guess 20 years about in between them. And Europe obviously had a long history of conflict before that, so I think they had good reason to suspect, like, is this just going to be some cycle where we're at each other's throats once every generation, and the continent just gets torn apart with increasingly devastating wars as our technology improves, and now we've got nukes, and, like, who knows what the next one's gonna be,
especially because of the industrialization as well. World War One is arguably like the first really industrial war. You have lots of, like, the classic like cavalry charge getting cut down by like automatic machine guns, that kind of stuff. That you also start to see the shadows of sort of in the end of the American Civil War. A lot of that stuff was early proto World War One warfare. There was a very much an attitude about these wars at the time where it's like, man, who knows if this is how it's going to be from now on, because war has changed in a way that previously was unthinkable.
Right, and Europe, was just kind of had just been experimenting with, like, becoming relatively democratized, like, since the Napoleonic era, right? So at the time they were also worried about seeing all these reactionary dictatorships springing up and seeing the Russian Revolution happen, and thinking, like, maybe this entire project is going to fail, and they had just tried the League of Nations and that didn't work out so well. I think it probably would have surprised them that, like, even though we had a Cold War after this, it probably would have surprised them how well it all turned out over the next several decades. Like,
I mean, the period of peace we've had since World War II is almost as unprecedented as the period of peace that came before World War One. After the Napoleonic Wars, there weren't really any sort of big, large-scale, great power conflicts in Europe for a long, long time, and then it all blows up in World War One, and then you immediately get World War II. If people have this tendency to always think that their times are the most important or the most apocalyptic, but sometimes it's very easy to understand why someone who lived through World War One or World War II could be like, man, is the world just going to end in my lifetime? Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, they had some kind of medium scale conflicts in the 1800s. Mm-hmm. There was, like, the Franco-Prussian War, and there was, like, a war between Russia and Turkey, and there was some other stuff. Right?
Yeah, Crimea, you have the Nightingales. Obviously, that's a big, like, historical, like, point that's remembered sometimes.
Right, but basically, I think this whole idea of where these kind of, like, counterbalancing alliances had sprung up before World War One, and then it just, like, dragged everybody into a conflict that started out small. That is something that had not happened for, like, 100 years before that. But like, because of like Europe's history of trying to solve their conflict problems in exactly that way, by making these, like, by keeping like a balance of power, so to speak. It's like, you've got to wonder if they were thinking, like, well, now we're paying the price for this, right? It's like we tried to avert war by making it so costly that it seemed like no one should ever go into one, but then they just did it anyways, and it was extremely costly. It's just
it's really difficult to analyze, like, a distributed cost versus, like, a concentrated one, and have and like, is it better to have a bunch of small wars or only one apocalyptic war every once in a while? That's really hard to try and figure out.
Yeah. If you want to continue with it. Okay.
Out. Swastikas, gone. Nazi propaganda, off the air. Concentration camps, empty. You'll see ruins. You'll see flowers. You'll see some mighty pretty scenery. Don't let it fool you. You are in enemy country. Be alert, suspicious of everyone. Take no chances. You are up against something more than tourist scenery. You are up against German history. It isn't good. This book was written chapter by chapter, not by one man, not by one Führer. It was written by the German people. Chapter 1. The Führer, Bismarck. Title, Blood and Iron. The armies, German. Under the Prussian Bismarck, the German Empire was built. The German states combined, serving notice to all that their religion was iron, that their God was blood. Bismarck's German
Jesus
Empire
Christ.
built itself by war, at the expense of Denmark, Austria, and France, and became in 1871 the mightiest military power in all Europe. Enough conquest for a while. Time out to digest it. Europe relaxes. The danger's over. Nice country, Germany. Tender people, the Germans. Very sweet music. Chapter 2. A new Führer. Kaiser Wilhelm. New title. Deutschland über alles. Germany overall. And the same tender German people smacked us with their World War I against Serbia, Russia, France, Belgium, Italy, Britain.
Can we pause for a moment? I think it's worth recapping a little bit of how World War I got started for people who don't know this. The way it started was not Germany attacked everyone. The way it started was there was an assassination in Serbia of an Austrian like high official or a prince or something like that, and basically Austria was super pissed at Serbia over this, goes to war over them, so Germany's not even involved at the beginning, but then because they've got all these alliances, then Russia goes to protect Serbia, Germany goes to protect Russia, and then Britain and France go to, Germany goes to attack Russia to protect Austria, and then Britain and France join in on the side of Russia, and then later you get the Ottoman Empire taking the side of the Germans and Austrians. So you know, it's like there really isn't any particular one nation that you can point a finger at and go, you did it. If if you're like taking a realistic view of how this process started, it was like basically pretty much everybody except for Serbia joined on purpose.
Yep.
The United States of America. It took all of us to do it, but we finally knocked that Führer out. Defeated the German armies. Second chapter ended.
Führer just
We
means
marched
leader, by
straight
the
into
way.
Germany
So.
and said,
Why, these people are okay. It was just that Kaiser we had to get rid of. You know, this is really some country. When it comes to culture, they lead the whole world.
we bit. We poured in our sympathy. We pulled out our armies. And they flung chapter 3 in our faces. Führer number 3. Slogan number 3. Today, Germany is ours. Tomorrow, the whole world. And the tender, repentant, sorry German people carried the torch of their culture to Austria, Czechoslovakia, Poland, France, England, Norway, Holland, Denmark, Belgium, Luxembourg, Russia, Yugoslavia, Greece, and the United States of America. Over the shattered homes, the broken bodies of millions of people that let down their guard. We almost lost this one. Took everything we had. Measure the cost in money? There isn't that much money. Measure the cost in lives? We can only guess at that figure. It took burning and scalding, drenching, freezing. It took legs, fingers, arms, and it took them by the millions. It cost hours, days, and years that will never return. It threw in our health, our wealth, our past and our future. It took every last ounce of our courage and guts. Now what happens?
Oh, hell, this is where we came in.
Yeah, this is where we came in.
And chapter 4?
Could be. It can happen again.
I just want to pause. I think this is a really interesting angle that this is taking. I think it is. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with all the analysis, but it is, I think, very interesting how the sort of the takeaway that it wants you to have is that, you know, there is something wrong with the German people, that this country has a unique problem, and that if we don't do something, that, you know, this is going to be a pattern going forward. And it does a really compelling job. It almost is trying to dehumanize I think the German civilians, the society as a whole. I guess maybe dehumanize isn't, you know, the most appropriate term. It's a bit extreme, but it's very much trying to make the case that, you know, like I said at the beginning, you know, these people aren't your friends. You know, you're in an enemy country. You need to be suspicious of everyone. I guess, you know, now that I think about it, it makes a lot of sense, but this is not the angle at all I was expecting it to go in.
Yeah, I don't know what angle I was. I guess I was expecting it to be like some kind of message of encouragement for soldiers or for war production or something like that. But instead, it's just like Germany is intrinsically dangerous and we can never trust them again. Or it's like weird that they would even, you know, want to make a propaganda video like that when they were just on the verge of they were about to go rebuild Germany.
Yeah, well, I almost wonder if this is a bit of looking at the past through the lens of the present. In a way, I think you could say that our sort of astonishment and surprise at this is a testament to how well we did of basically turning an enemy nation into our allies. Where today, you know, it's unthinkable for us to think of, you know, Germany as, you know, this evil state. Or, you know, the most infamous, you know, reputation of Germany in the modern state is that they're too liberal. You know, right wingers would be like, oh, you know, Germany just lets too many Syrian refugees and stuff in and stuff like this. I guess in a way, or I don't even think in a way, I think there's actually, the more I think about it, really just does stand as like, man, being able to turn a country that, you know, had previously started 2 world wars against you just into your ally, you know, culturally and through like economic ties is really OP, man. That's a really good strategy for, you know, disarming nations. No wonder, you know, the people in the early 2000s looked so fondly upon the idea of doing that with the Middle East, because if you could, it would be, you know, it would be immense.
Yeah, I mean, they had a lot of resistance to overcome, and I think Yeah, like like you were saying earlier, like at the superficial level, this seems to be like they're making a very plausible case for like, oh, maybe Germany is just going to be dangerous forever, and yet we got past that into what Germany is now. It really is kind of miraculous.
Yeah, something I've thought about in the past, I've had discussions with friends about, is looking at when countries really fuck up in a pretty unique way and need to be punished. How do you avoid just sort of re-entrenching the same ideas or same ideas or same problems or schools of thought in that country? Like if you look at, for example, it's not a country, but like the American South and some of those Confederate states after the Civil War,
Yeah.
after Grant gets out of the presidency, a lot of those states were ceded back to, what would turn into the Dixiecrats, and this whole period of sometimes called neo-slavery, but then obviously the whole struggle for the civil rights movement. There was a real step back after the Civil War, where once these places regained their political autonomy, were able to reassert their, ability to oppress the African Americans that lived in those places. A lot of it, there were improvements, but it actually wasn't, that much of a step forward, especially in contrast to what it was immediately after the Civil War. In the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, when the southern states are still under like military districts, you have elections of like African Americans and stuff like this, and then the KKK starts to rear its head, and Grant goes out of office, and a lot of the stuff starts to slip away. And it doesn't really seem like that's the case in Germany. I mean, I guess I would be more interested to hear maybe the perspective of someone that lives in Germany, because to be fair, it is every 5 or 6 years you'll hear some big story where it's like German government discovers cell of secret neo-Nazis in high positions that were trying to take over the government. There was just one of those recently in the last couple of months about a bunch of weird German crazies that were trying to, but man, it seems like those stories are pretty few and far between when you look at like the overall direction of the country. And I wonder why that is. Why is it that it seems like Germany was able to pretty definitively close the book on like, anti-Semitism and a lot of the other problems that plagued it in the past, but a place like America, we really struggled for a long time to get to the point where now Republicans don't have any problem with or I should say Republicans, that's not fair, but there's no significant portion of the country that seriously balks at like the prospect of black people being able to vote, when
Right.
previously, but man, it took us a long time to get there, whereas it seems like in Germany, man, it seems like they had a pretty quick turnaround, from 1940s Auschwitz, to 1980s, or 1980s and 1990s, the reunification of Germany. Seems like they had a much quicker turnaround than other places that try to sort of reckon with their past.
Yeah. So I don't know what the right explanation is for that contrast. Like, why was the rebuilding of Germany so much more successful than the rebuilding of the American South? But I've got a couple of ideas that come to mind. One of which is that Germany was like one of the like richest, most industrialized places in the world already. So of course it's like not terribly hard to rebuild their economy. They have like a humongous amount of skilled workers and that kind of stuff. Trade contacts, whatever, and they have rich neighbors. Where the American South was a lot more agrarian, and they were dependent on slavery, which had just been taken away from them. So it's very difficult for them to rebuild economically. And then I think the other thing that comes to mind is that the reconstruction of the American South was undertaken in a way that was somewhat punitive. Not entirely, because they didn't just go arrest all the people in the Confederacy and so it's not as punitive as it could have been. But it seems like when we went into Germany, there was like a very concerted effort to put the blame for all the stuff that went wrong specifically on the Nazi regime and not on the majority of the German people, right? Whereas like in the American South, they didn't particularly harshly go after the regime, and it seemed like this kind of like more broadly distributed pall of guilt over them. I don't know.
Especially as though, that you're 100% right. In the Civil War, there was a real changing of attitudes among the Lincoln administration, lots of generals, specifically like Sherman is a great example of this, where at the start of the war, it was very much, oh, this is, an area in rebellion. We should, these are still American citizens. Whereas, further, as the war, became a lot more dicey, and it became very clear that, the Southerners really didn't like the Northerners. There was sort of a hardening of the hearts that occurs there. One thing that makes me kind of wonder is, if you think of something I've always wondered about, or something I've always thought about the Civil War, is, man, the South really kind of threw. When you look at their want to try and maintain slavery and maintain those institutions, one of the best things to ever happen for the effort to remove slavery was the fact that all the southern states seceded and gave up all their federal power. Who knows how long it would have taken us to actually ban slavery, maybe not functionally, but technically, if there was no Civil War. If you look at like the Corwin Amendment, right before the Civil War kicks off, the North offers a constitutional amendment to the South where that basically says, we will never ban slavery in the southern states. Just look at how long it took like the 1964 Civil Rights Act to go through. And even after that, there were still a lot of struggles. You kind of, something you wonder is, if the South had not been willing to, cut the whole country in half, they could have taken a mode of defending slavery, of just slowing the process down and entrenching it as much as possible. And I think you can see sort of a similar effect in Germany, where a big part of the distrust in the German government in the aftermath of World War I was a lot of Germans felt like we surrendered while we were still fighting. So in World War II, they didn't surrender. When the writing was on the wall, while they still had forces, they fought to the very bitter end. And in a way, all that destruction, there was very little left over for them to cling on to. This is the kind of thing that we can't ever really. This is the kind of thing that's really difficult to know, because you can't falsify or verify or do any tests. But if it was not the case that the armies of the Soviets and the Allies had to fight all the way into the German heartland, in case of the Soviets all the way to Berlin, maybe there would have been a more entrenched opinion that Hitler wasn't that bad. We were a country at war, stuff like this. I kind of wonder if the fact that it had to go to the very end contributes to the fact that you're able to sort of move on and build something totally different, as opposed to keep clinging to the idea that, something else could have been done or could have been done differently or wasn't all that bad, when you see that much destruction wrought to the very end. But that's just like a theory.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of talk about how, the failure to rebuild after World War I was really informative to the way that they tried to rebuild after World War II. They looked at what went wrong with the League of Nations and tried to correct it and that kind of stuff. But one thing I've never heard about is whether the reconstruction of Germany and Japan was informed at all by what went wrong in the reconstruction of the American South, right? I wonder if they had that on their mind, because it was not terribly distant history. I mean, it was a few generations earlier, but it seems like the most obvious example to draw on, and I'm glad you brought up that comparison. I think it's really interesting. I don't know, because it seemed like in the South there's just this long-standing resentment of the North, even to some extent still to this day.
Oh yeah.
And in Germany, there's just, it seemed, I don't live in Germany or anything, right? I'm not super culturally.
It doesn't seem like there's a big group of Germans that are mad at the French, or the Americans or the Brits or anything like this.
Yeah, exactly. It does not seem like there is mainstream cultural resentment toward the West.
I don't like the comparison when it's made normally, because I think it equates two things that are very different. But there certainly was not a big fight to maintain Nazi monuments in the way there was to maintain Confederate monuments in America. Not to say that the Confederacy is morally equal to the Third Reich or anything like that. But right. Yeah. And yeah, something especially that happens in the Civil War is there's a lot of Northerners that are like, man, we won the war. Let's not poke the nest anymore. Let's make concessions to the Southerners in a lot of ways. Some of the earliest refutations of Confederate monuments, it's funny, are from the day from Union soldier veteran groups. There were groups dedicated to veterans, Union veterans of the Civil War, who said we don't want federal money or any kind of tax money going to monuments dedicated to traitors. But there's a very big attitude of the North that was like, dude, we want to put this shit behind us. It's time to put the country back together. Are we going to spend the next 10 years trying to fight all these cultural and political battles now? Like, no, it's time to oh god, there's some phrase. It was like hands clenched over like an abyss of blood, or oh god, I'm not going to remember the specific phrase. There was a specific phrase in the time talking about like, yes, we did just kill a bunch of each other, and we still kind of disagree with this fundamental issue, but like, let's just move on, okay? Because no one wants to keep going with this horrible shit. And I wonder, and at the time, it's very understandable to be like, man, I want to put this behind me. We just fought the Civil War. This is awful. But then you look at what the counterfactual would be. We don't know, right? But man, maybe if we had done, 10 more years of, cultural bloodletting, fighting over this stuff, and we had settled the issue, maybe then it's, the Civil Rights Act of, 1934 instead of 1964. But maybe it just makes it worse. Maybe just maybe it just pours salt in the wound and makes it fester, and makes it even worse. It's so hard. It's so impossible, really, to say.
Yeah. Another interesting contrast, like that has to do with the monuments, is that a lot of those Confederate officials and generals and stuff were treated after the war as though they had been like honorable opponents who like did were just trying to serve their local communities or whatever. I think people didn't want to like demonize Robert E. Lee, for example, because they were afraid that was going to like turn the South against them and make it harder for them to rebuild. And that's in stark contrast to the way that the Nazi regime was treated, right? It was just, let's just demonize the fuck out of them, make it extremely clear that we're blaming them and not the rest of the people, right? And
that kind of public accountability, that's something I wonder about even today. Something I've talked about with other friends, as, sort of like a neoliberal establishment type guy. Man, something I've wondered about a lot, and I've talked about this with friends, is what if, in the aftermath of the Afghanistan wars and stuff, if, George Bush or Donald Rumsfeld or, Dick Cheney or someone actually did go in front of the International Court of Justice, that we're not signatories to. What if Tony Blair and George Bush had, potentially even gone to jail? Would that have helped contribute or helped prevent just the massive malaise of like, anti-interventionism, general anti-establishment, anti-U.S. sentiment that I think is really negative, actually, even in the aftermath of those failures? Maybe if America had more self-accountability in the Bush administration about the, potentially war crimes, depending upon what charges you're talking about, then maybe, there could have been a much better and healthier response to that. And that's something I wonder about all the time.
And now I'm reminded of the Kraut video we watched that one time about how hard it is to draw conclusions from historical trends because you're dealing with such small sample sizes and these relatively unique events that I don't know.
Yeah, because the question is like, let's say, 2007, Donald Rumsfeld, is put in front of the International Court of Justice, and they find, you have, the way in which your administration talked about, or not your administration, but the way in which, the Department of Defense talked about weapons of mass destruction, constitutes you committing some sort of fraud in the, inducement, I'm not going to know the exact term, but basically going to war over false pretenses, which is a pretty serious war crime. And you're going to go to jail for 15 years now. Maybe that kind of very public trial, maybe we come out of the other side of that, and there isn't this general thought that America can't do any good when it comes to intervening, and they really should step back. Or maybe it's the case that all the anti-Iraq war and Afghanistan war sentiment that I think contributes to a lot of negative trends in politics is even more pronounced because now it's on the stage and everyone sees it. That's just the kind of thing that I don't know if we'll ever have an answer for.
Yeah, I don't think we can, but I don't know. Let's just continue.
The next war. That is why you occupy Germany. Make that next war impossible.
It's funny, actually. Sorry, just to make that next war impossible. I don't know if you've ever heard the sort of historical anecdote about, I think it's Woodrow Wilson, Churchill, and Stalin meeting. and they're discussing occupying Germany. And Stalin was said something to the effect of, we should execute, the 3,000 highest-ranking German officials to make sure that they couldn't go to war again. And Woodrow Wilson sort of made the joke, "Oh, I think only 1,000 would do." And Churchill was furious, like, "I can't believe you discussed, killing these honorable officers and stuff like this." I'll see if I can find something about that.
Easy job.
I think you must have meant Roosevelt, not Wilson, right?
Don't relax that.
I don't know. I think this might have been before, or yeah, no, sorry, yeah, I definitely meant Woodrow. I definitely didn't mean Woodrow Wilson. Sorry, yeah, FDR.
The Nazi party may be gone, but Nazi thinking, Nazi training, and Nazi trickery remain. German lust for conquest is not dead. Merely gone undercover. Somewhere in this Germany are the SS guard, the Schutzstaffel, Gestapo gangsters. Out of uniform. You won't know them. They'll know you. Somewhere in this Germany are stormtroopers by the thousands. Out of sight, part of the mob, still watching and hating you. Somewhere in this Germany, there are 2 million ex-Nazi officials. Out of power, still in there.
Yeah, here it is. This is from a Political article. At a dinner meeting of the Big Three on November 29, Stalin proposed executing 50,000 to 100,000 German officers so that Germany could not plan another war. Roosevelt, believing Stalin was not serious, quipped that, quote, "maybe 49,000 would be enough," end quote. Churchill, however, was outraged and denounced, quote, "the cold-blooded execution of soldiers who fought for their country," end quote. Before storming out of the room, he said that only war criminals should be put on trial. Stalin brought him back after saying that he was only joking.
I don't know Stalin's personality well enough to gauge, how plausible is it that he was joking, but I find it, on the one hand, a person who's known for killing millions of people might have very well have been serious about that, or might have been joking about it.
Yeah, that is just one of those, historical anecdotes, sometimes reality is truly stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
Just imagine those three leaders, cracking jokes around a table.
Next time, remember that only yesterday, every business, every profession was part of Hitler's system. Doctors, technicians, clockmakers, postmen, farmers, housekeepers, toy makers, barbers, cooks, ductwork. Practically every German was part of the Nazi network. Guard particularly against this group. These are the most dangerous. German youth. Children, when the Nazi party came into power, they know no other system than the one that poisoned their minds. Soaked in it.
Pope Ratzinger, who just recently died, was one of the Hitler Youth, I believe, wasn't he?
They've heard no
I'm not sure.
speech, read no free press. They were
I don't know why I
born
called him
most
Pope
slave
Ratzinger.
propaganda.
That's obviously not his title, but you know the
Product of
person I'm
worst
talking about.
educational crime in the entire history. Practically everything you believe in, they have been trained
Pope
to hate.
Benedict XVI.
They believe they were born to be masters, that we are inferior, designed to be their slaves. They may deny it now, but they believe it. Try to prove it again. Don't argue with them. Don't try to change their point of view. Other Allied representatives will concern themselves with that. You are not being sent into Germany as educators, soldiers on guard. You will observe their local laws, respect their customs and religion, and you will respect their property rights. Will not ridicule, will not argue with them, not be friendly, be aloof, watchful, suspicious. Every German is a potential source of trouble. Therefore, there must be no fraternization with any of the German people.
Not, a one-to-one. There's some significant differences. But it almost reminds me of sort of some of the discourse around community policing versus policing from out of the community, of officers that, don't live in a particular area. They might have like an hour drive, to the areas that they patrol versus the area that they live. Some of the more extreme cases, the way in which it is really emphasizing that, you as an American soldier watching this, really shouldn't put down roots, or, they say don't make friends, things like this, and try to remain very divorced from the cultural, I guess the cultural context of the place that you're staying in for a pretty extended period of time. I have no idea, I guess, off the top of my head, how long these deployments were, but I imagine, multiple years in many cases, and in most cases.
Yeah. I just looked up the thing about Ratzinger, by the way. Okay, but about Pope Benedict XVI. So okay, this is what Wikipedia says anyway. It says he was in the Hitler Youth, but he was involuntarily conscripted into it.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. There is, it's very difficult sometimes to sort out, the people that were voluntarily Nazis versus the people that, only did it for political reasons. But there is a real case, sort of like doing business in like certain parts of the world. You just kind of have to make bribes in order to get anything done. There were sectors of German life, to my understanding, where it's like you kind of had to become a Nazi party member in order to live your life.
Well, he was 14 years old, and apparently all the boys of that age were required to sign up.
Okay. I'm not sure about the mandatory conscription, or I don't know if conscription is the right term, but mandatory joining of that age for German youth. But that seems totally plausible.
Yeah,
if someone's, yeah, okay.
Fraternization means making friends. German people.
I wonder if they were worried that American soldiers might be convinced to become more like the Nazis by residing in the culture that the Nazi Party sprang from. It sounds like that's what their concern was.
Yeah, that last line is wild. Fraternization means making friends. The German people are not your friends. That's a wild line.
It is.
Just to think about. Yeah. Although, just on that note of, not wanting, them to become Nazis, there's a whole underrepresented trove of history about, in the immediate period before America really entered World War II, a disturbing amount of Americans, talking about how, we should do what Hitler's doing over there here. I think it's Lincoln Rockwell, the American Nazi, filled out Madison Square Garden with a rally he had. Different but slightly related. There's also a bunch of really embarrassing photos of college campuses having protests for peace. Don't go to war with Hitler, stuff like this. At Harvard and all the other Ivy Leagues in America. In Britain there was a similar phenomenon. This idea, Hitler hasn't attacked us, why should we go to war? It's funny. There's a George Orwell quote that says, pacifism is objectively pro-fascist, which sounds like the kind of thing you'd expect some warmonger to say, not George Orwell. And it's because George Orwell, who had served in the Spanish Civil War fighting the fascists there, I think he even got hit by a sniper at some point. He went township to township in Britain arguing the case to go to war because there was a big anti-war sentiment in Britain of let's not get involved. Let's just, sit back and let Hitler do what Hitler does. It doesn't concern us. There's a whole underserved section of history about, friendliness or, outright support of Nazism in America and other parts of the West that weren't directly involved with the war.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of that, by the way, was driven by fear of the far left stuff, right? Like the Russian Revolution being in recent memory, they were kind of terrified of communist revolutions springing up all over the West, and this was a big part of why the Nazi Party gained power in the first place, and there was at least some amount of similar sentiment in the other kind of industrialized Western countries.
There's even there's even some accounts, or I should say accounts. I'm not as familiar with this stuff, but basically there were even some plots among U.S. senators who got paid off by basically to be spies for Nazi Germany to basically start spreading pro-Germany propaganda in the U.S., especially back in the day. U.S. senators, and I believe House of Representatives as well, had free mailing, which was a really big deal back in the day. And they used it to actually sometimes distribute. There were a couple cases of them being paid off by essentially German spies to become assets that would then spread, use this free postage to spread leaflets and stuff like this. I think was basically the plot, which doesn't sound like a lot, but back in the day was a huge fucking deal.
Mm-hmm.
not associate with German men, women, or children. You will not associate with them on familiar terms, either in public or in private. You will not visit in their homes, nor will you ever take them into your confidence. However friendly, however sorry, however sick of the Nazi party they may seem, they cannot come back into the civilized fold just by sticking out their hand and saying, "I'm sorry." Sorry. Not sorry they caused the war. They're only sorry they lost it.
Yeah, those children, only sorry they lost.
That is the hand that heiled Adolf Hitler. That is the hand that dropped the bombs on defenseless Rotterdam, Brussels, Belgrade. That is the hand that destroyed the cities, villages, homes of Russia. That is the hand that held the whip over the Polish, Yugoslav, French, and Norwegian slaves. That is the hand that took their food. That is the hand that starved them. That is the hand that murdered, massacred Greeks, Czechs, Jews. That is the hand that killed and crippled American soldiers, sailors, Marines. Clasp that hand. It's not the kind of a hand...
Can we pause for a second? I'm surprised at how little emphasis they put on the Jews, and I'm suspecting this is probably because they had not yet discovered the full extent of what was going on.
Yeah, I'd be really curious when this was made. It also could be the case, I mean, when you get back to the 1940s and stuff like this, anti-Semitism wasn't even really necessarily a uniquely German thing. A
Right.
big part of why the Holocaust went over the way it did is because in many places in Europe, when people heard, oh, they're taking all the Jews off to some camp, out in the woods, people were like, all right, nice, right on, finally, Jesus Christ. Time somebody did something about this, about those guys. It is really important to distinguish the level of knowledge about the Holocaust that was had, because at the very least, this is my understanding, is that there is a big difference between, the knowledge of the general German public that Jews were being taken to camps and that these camps were very bad places versus that gas chambers were a thing where Jews were being shoved into, versus then like the Wehrmacht participating in some of the mass killings but not being aware of the absolutely worst conduct in the death camps. There's lots of different levels to knowledge of the Holocaust, but it isn't the case that the German people just had no idea that the Jews were being taken off to these camps, and that the camps were not nice places where people did not infrequently die. But I think, at least my understanding is that the knowledge was much more detached. Like, they're going off to they imagined these to be like slightly worse versions of Japanese internment camps. Is my understanding of what the general German public knew.
Yeah, I know there was a precedent for it in South Africa, I believe, in the early 1900s, and I don't know the details of that, but I would imagine if I were just a random ass German at the time and I heard that there were some camps going on, that's probably what I'd be picturing is, they're doing whatever they did in South Africa, right? No, I don't unfortunately I don't know enough about the South African situation to say that those were extremely brutal death camps or they weren't. I just don't know, but yeah.
But there are millions of Germans. Some of those guys must be okay.
Perhaps. But which ones?
Perhaps.
Yeah, the arguments, these are some wild fucking sentences. I mean, if you take off like the nameplates, like if you just replace Germans with a group of people, damn, that starts to become really weird really quick.
They must prove that they have been cured beyond the shadow of a doubt, or they ever again are allowed to take their place among respectable nations. Until that day, we stand. We are determined that their plan for world conquest shall stop, here and now. We are determined that they shall never again use peaceful industries for warlike purposes. We are determined that our children shall never face this German terror. We are determined that the vicious German cycle of war, phony peace, War. Phony peace. War. Phony peace. Now once, and for all time, come to an end.
It's worth noting just really quickly that that specific line of phony peace and peaceful industries for war, that was a really big thing. There are a ton of cases of German industry designing commercial, like the example I know the example that I know the best is the case of German planes being designed in peacetime in a way that could very easily be retrofitted into warplanes that they weren't allowed to build. So, for example, designing like a commercial airplane that was, presumably designed to, carry people, but was actually designed such that it could fit bombs very efficiently because they weren't allowed to make those kinds of planes that could carry bombs. It's kind of similar to sort of the open secret about Japan's aircraft carriers, or as they are officially referred to, helicopter carriers. But many of which, I think all of which, are actually very clearly designed to be very easily convertible in a very short amount of time into actual aircraft carriers.
Yeah, and speaking of which, we are next going to watch a video on Japan.
Oh yeah.
That is your job in Germany.
Yeah, so I wonder if this has any information in the description about when this came out. 1945.
So that would be the same year that the war ended.
Let's see. Office of the Chief Signal Officer, 1947, 1964. So is that the period in which it was shown? I'm not sure.
I can't imagine they're still showing this in 1964. Well,
Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
I actually have no idea. Here we go. Production date 1945. Okay, yeah. So this is right off of the heels. I mean, when is VE Day actually?
I want to say it's in like April or May of that year, and then Japan a few months later.
May of 1945. So yeah, they probably were working. I mean, they probably knew that they were going to be. I mean, they certainly knew they were going to be occupying Germany. So
Yeah.
it wouldn't surprise me if this is also in development even before 1945.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, next up we've got much longer one.
Yeah,
This one's from 44. Interesting.
Yeah, this next one is about Japan, and it is probably going to be very racist. Just letting everybody know. Like,
yeah, I mean, arguably that first one is actually kind of racist too. The way in which it talks about the German people. I mean, damn, that's really scary territory when you start to get into talking about an entire population being complicit.
yeah. That one seemed to be implying it's like there's something violent underlying in their culture or something like that. I think the Japan one is going to be worse.
Oh yeah, no, I have no doubt in my mind.
Already with the slurs.
I was gonna say, wow, that's actually not that bad of a start, but then they kind of immediately threw that. There's a lot of lead up.
Yeah, just this huge
We shall
long
never completely
montage of
understand the
Japanese
Japanese
culture.
mind.
Oh,
Then,
as
they
soon as I
would never
fucking
have
say it,
been-
god damn it.
Otherwise, there would never have been a Pearl Harbor. But we must try to understand Japan because we have become locked in the closest of all relationships, war. Whether we like it or not, we and the Japanese are going to be at very close range for a very long time. So let's see what kind of people these Japanese really are, what they believe in, what they want, and how they get it. And if this tale begins to get a little fantastic, bear with us. We're dealing with the fantastic people. First, let's examine a typical Japanese soldier. His average height is 5 feet 3 inches. His average weight, 117 pounds. He and his brother soldiers are as much alike as photographic prints off the same negative.
Jesus.
Oh my god.
His pay is 10 yen, or about $2.36 a month. His personal equipment is simple but practical. Fully supplied with ammunition, the load he carries weighs about 60 pounds, more than half his weight. His uniform is ill-fitting, his appearance unsoldierly, even comic according to Western standards. At drill, he may lack precision. But he is hard. He is able. He knows his job. His endurance is phenomenal. He'd just as soon go over a mountain as around it. He lives on rice. Rice and fish, or occasionally rice and meat, but often on rice alone. And he's proud of it. He is prouder still of the fact that to be a soldier is the highest human achievement in Japan. He has been trained to be a soldier almost from birth, and into his tough little mind has been drilled and hammered the fanatical belief that Japanese are descendants of gods and destined to rule the earth and all who live on it. To this end, treachery, brutality, rape, and torture are all justified if used against non-Japanese. In combat, his single aim is to close with the enemy in a hand-to-hand fighting. He believes that in the attack itself, there is some mystic virtue by which greater numbers bearing superior weapons can be vanquished. In his mind, there is usually no question of choice between death and surrender. To him, death in battle is the attainment of an ideal. Where his flag leads, he follows in a blind emotional rush. For his flag not only represents his country, it is also the image of his God of gods. His flag is the rising sun, and the rising sun is the symbol of the emperor. To the Japanese, their emperor is the most holy of holies, their visible God. He is also their political ruler, the natural and supernatural, religion and politics all done up in a one-man package. Entrust to one man the powers of the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, the Premier of Soviet Russia. Add to them the powers of the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. Then top it all with the divine authority of our own Son of God, and you will begin to understand what Hirohito means to the Japanese, why they call him the God Emperor.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that most of the political authority was not actually exercised by the emperor. He was like theoretically a divine right monarch who could overrule anybody else, but in practice it was a lot of the people around him who wielded the authority.
The sun, and what is so high, so brilliant, and so mighty as the sun? Accordingly, no one can stand above or look down upon the emperor. When he passes through the streets, all windows above the first floor must be tightly shuttered. The train to Tokyo from anywhere in Japan is the up train to Tokyo because the emperor lives there. Nor can the emperor be imitated in any way. Only his automobile may be maroon colored. Not even his tailor may touch the person of the emperor, for who would lay hands upon the sun? If you are Japanese, it actually hurts your eyes to look at Hirohito, just as it hurts your eyes to look at the blazing sun. Nor would anyone dream of handling his uncovered picture. When Hirohito's face appeared on the front cover of an American magazine, the Japanese government filed an official protest with the American State Department. Whatever takes place in Japan, it is he, the God Emperor, that causes it. From him all things emanate, and in him all things subsist. He makes the Japanese rice grow. He makes Japanese soldiers conquer the world. In his name, they bring to other people justice, enlightenment, truth, co-prosperity, and peace.
The year 1940 was a holy year in Japan, for the nation celebrated the 2600th anniversary of its founding by the first God Emperor, Jimmu.
If you are Japanese, you believe that Jimmu was the grandson of Prince Ninigi, who himself was the grandson of the sun goddess, Amaterasu Omikami. And she, the sun herself, said to Prince Ninigi, "Go down and rule over the luxuriant land of reed plains, which your posterity is to govern as monarchs." Whereon Ninigi descended from heaven to the land of reed plains and built a palace, and took to wife the daughter of a mountain deity, and she bore Ninigi a son. And Ninigi's son in turn took to wife the daughter of the god of the sea, and they too had a son, whom they named Jimmu. Exactly 2,600 years ago, Jimmu landed at Yamato and proclaimed himself emperor over all the islands, saying, "Let us extend our capital until it covers the 8 corners of the world under one roof." And in this way, the Japanese Empire was created. Hirohito is the 128th direct descendant of the sun goddess. And since from the beginning the emperor gods have mingled their flesh with mortal flesh, it follows that all Japanese are cousins in divinity. The soldier and the wrestler and the priest, the woman in the rice fields, the factory worker, the geisha girl, the businessman, the diplomat, the fisherman off California. All are members of one family, whose blood is superior to the blood of any other race on earth, because it is mixed with the liquid sunshine of the gods. And what's more, they believe it. And being of divine origin, all their acts fall into the divine pattern called the Way of the Gods, or Shinto.
It's very interesting, and to be honest, kind of insidious, the way in which, and I'm noticing they're doing it a lot more here than they were in the German video, but they were doing it in German video as well, and they're also doing it to a much stronger degree here, in addition to more frequently. But the way in which they paint sort of the very ideology of the people as a whole as being in such opposition to the existence of America or free Americans as so strong that we necessarily, it's like they're gonna come for us, so we've gotta, step up to the plate. If we don't, the Japanese people or the German people believe that we are inferior and that we should be their slaves. Like, they are coming for us. So it almost that justifies the idea of, needing to really be hostile or on guard to these people, to these people. Just that, the population, not just any one government or any one, like, political ideology.
Right, and it kind of makes sense if you want your soldiers to fight as hard as possible to make it think that it's not just their government that's scary, but it's that guy that you have to shoot over there is terrifying, right? It's like, it makes sense that would be very motivating.
Yeah. It's not dissimilar to, I'm sure, some of the rhetoric used by Germans, talking about how, for example, like, especially the way in which they would probably talk about the Russians as, these agents of cultural Marxism and Bolshevism,
Yeah, they had a whole big thing about the British in Germany too, right? Because, like, you remember in the German video, there was a whole thing about they've got just this lust for world conquest and they're just trying to control everything, right? But that's exactly the reputation the British have had in continental Europe for quite a long time before this. So, like, and it makes sense, right? They've got, like, the world's greatest empire or whatever, and if the thing that we really cared about was just stopping people from having the lust for conquest, then the British should be just as much enemies as the Germans are. But anyway, at the beginning of this video, I noticed they said the thing about, like, this may seem fantastical, but it's because this is a fantastical society that we're talking about, right? And it's really, like, that's really insidious too, right? It's like, because it's like priming people to believe, like, you're not even gonna believe how different these fucking people are from you, right? It's like very otherizing.
Mm-hmm.
Brings us to the national religion of Japan, Shintoism.
Now, Shintoism will not be easy to understand, but since it is the heart, brain, and soul of the nation and dictates all Japanese actions for the living and for the dead, it is important that we...
A bit all-encompassing.
According to Shinto, the population of Japan is one son of heaven, the emperor, 9 million minor gods, 75 million living people, and billions upon billions of ghosts, the spirits of all Japanese who have died in the past. These spirits stand watch over all Japan, follow their soldiers into battle, and serenely float around in every Japanese house where guests are frequently introduced to them. They are so near, the living merely have to clap their hands to call their attention. They are fed choice food and incense is burned for them. Each living Japanese is merely a link in this endless chain of ghosts. He is identical with them except for the unimportant fact that he breathes and can be seen. Each living Japanese knows he is constantly surrounded by these spirits who guard him and watch over him to see that he obeys the emperor and follows the way of the gods. To watch over special Japanese activities, there is a host of minor gods. The volcano is a god. The lightning. There is a god of the silkworm, the god of the night wind. These pearl divers have a god, and annually they hold a ceremony for him. These farmers have a rice god to whom they offer prayers for a good harvest. These scarecrows are all gods of one kind or another. There are over 100,000 Shinto shrines in which these local gods and spirits are worshipped. For the living Japanese, Shinto decrees that all their actions must imitate the way of the gods, who handle chopsticks thusly, arrange flowers thusly, drink tea thusly, Worship the emperor thusly. Enter a room thusly. Greet an acquaintance thusly. Now, on the surface, Shinto seems to be a nice, quaint religion for a nice, quaint people. And in the olden days, it used to be just that. But today, there's a diabolical joker in Shintoism. For since about 1870, the state has forced into the teachings of Shinto a mad, fanatical doctrine. A doctrine that has brought suffering and death to untold millions of innocent Asiatics. And now to thousands upon thousands of Americans. This doctrine is based on the divine command that Jimo, the first god emperor, was supposed to have given his people 2,600 years ago. Let us extend the capital and cover the 8 corners of the world under one roof. To cover the 8 corners of the world under a Japanese roof. The Japs have a special name for Jimo's divine command. It's called Hako Ichiyu, and it has become the national ambition of Japan.
From the viewpoint of Hako Ichiyu, the Emperor of Japan is the Emperor of all the races of the world. There are no 7 seas. All the oceans are to be recognized as the great Japanese Sea.
And in 1930, the modern American college-educated minister Matsuoka said,
To save humanity, in conformity with the great spirit in which the Emperor Jimmu founded the empire, Japan should take over the management of Asia, then extend it to the rest of the world.
If you are Japanese, you believe you have been commanded by heaven to conquer all other races and peoples and put them under a Japanese rule.
Yeah, if you are Japanese, the way in which they just say like every Japanese believes this really sets up like the basis by which you could like intellectually justify like just the like most broad and like despicable forms of like racism and like suspicion of these people as like an enemy, not just, you know, someone you look down on, but like as a threat.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, you know, there was that quote right at the beginning about the Japanese American soldiers serving in Europe, and it's like, these are honorable Americans or whatever, but it's like, how do you square that with the idea that being Japanese intrinsically subjects you to this ideology? It just doesn't come together.
Yeah, it kind of comes off as, you know, I'm not racist, but ...
Yeah.
If you are Japanese, you believe the place of honor among the spirits is reserved for those who die in battle. For they become warrior gods and are enshrined in a sacred temple, Yasukuni Shrine. The names of soldiers killed in battle are written on little tablets and placed at night in the inner recesses of this most holy Yasukuni Shrine. That is the greatest honor that man can achieve in Japan, to die in battle and be enshrined in Yasukuni, where even the emperor comes to bow to him. That's why soldiers, when saying goodbye to each other, often say, "See you in Yasukuni." That's why mothers and wives accept the ashes of their dead soldiers without grief or sorrow.
That's so bad. That line really bothers me. Okay, can we pause for a second?
Yeah.
The thing about like their families express no grief or sorrow, right? It comes across
pretty unlikely.
Like they're presenting it as if this is just like documentary information about their culture, but really it's like, if you're trying to convince people to kill a soldier, it's like, but don't worry about the fact that this is a person with a family and friends and stuff. They don't actually care about them. It comes across that way.
Oh, I didn't even think about it that way. Yeah, the way I was thinking of, but no, I think you're 100% right. It serves that function as well. The way I was thinking of it was that it sort of demonstrates like this cold, like inhuman callousness that like they're so devoted to this idea. You know, hey, I'm telling you, they're devoted to this idea. Look, here's the evidence. They don't even cry when their loved ones die in service to this end.
Yeah, well, it's that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting how it's all very much to a purpose. Like it's not just like generic, like, oh, you know, we hate them, blah 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 blah. It's very much said. It's an argument. They're making an argument. They're making a very case. They're making like a very like, you know, not logical in the sense that like it's correct, but they're trying to establish like a clear line of like, if A and B, then C. Like if the Japanese do believe this and or they believe it, you know, this strongly, then the logical conclusion is to be racist. I think that's really interesting how it's very much not an appeal. It doesn't feel like they're making very much like appeals to like any sort of bigotry or anything like that. But they're trying to make like make an intellectual case for racism in this case.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree with the thing about bigotry, right? Because it's like at face value, you're right. They're not just saying like blatantly super racist stuff here, but it does seem like they're presenting this as like these people are very alien to us. They're doing a lot of
that's true.
They're doing a lot of the kind of talk that would like undercut your sympathy for another human, and in that sense, I think there's like. You can tell there's bigotry underlying it, even if it's not.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true, 100%.
Yeah.
Them to be cherished and cared for, to be given food and drink and a lighted cigarette to smoke. That's why Jap soldiers would rather be killed than surrender. For to be killed means they become warrior gods. To surrender means everlasting shame and dishonor to them and their family and all their ancestors. If you are Japanese, you believe these things implicitly.
Implicitly?
I don't even know what they mean by that.
But if you are not Japanese, what then is the real
Like
Japan?
the whole tone of voice changes.
The Japan of the geographer, the anthropologist, and the historian. The Japan of which the Japanese themselves know little or nothing.
It might even be a different
The
narrator. I
name
think
Japan
it is.
comes from two Chinese words, ji and pen. The literal translation of which is the land where the sun comes from. The Chinese called it that because Japan lay to the east. Geographers say Japan is a chain of volcanic islands, 1,200 miles long and an average of 120 miles wide, our total land mass being a little larger than the state of California. Rocky and mountainous, only 16% of Japan is suitable for farming. Every human being in Japan lives within sight of mountains, many of them from 6,000 to 12,000 feet high. There are some 50 active volcanoes scattered through Japan. On an average of 4 times a day, Japan has earthquakes, severe shocks occurring about once every 2.5 years, with one disastrous earthquake about every 25 years.
Can we pause for a second? I'm curious about that footage that they just showed of the stuff falling down, right? So, like, that's probably not authentic footage of a Japanese earthquake, but I guess I'm curious if it is. Like, I wonder if they, like, staged it, or if it came from a movie, or, like, I don't know.
Yeah. It certainly would. I guess I don't really know what like the deal is with like trying to do recordings and stuff in the 1940s, but I gotta imagine it'd probably be pretty hard to catch a fucking earthquake like in the moment live.
Yeah, it seems like the footage is like too good.
Maybe, yeah. But maybe, I don't know.
There are some 45 cities with a population of over 100,000, only 3 of which are beyond the range of 16-inch naval guns. Tokyo, the capital, with a population of 7,900,000, is the 3rd largest city in the world. And what of the people of Japan and their so-called divine origin? Anthropologists say the original inhabitants of the islands were a hairy barbarian people called Ainu.
Oh my god.
Later on,
Jesus.
tribes moved in and began conquering the Ainus. Still later, other tribes from many sources arrived on the scene. The fusion of all these tribes and races resulted in the Japanese of today, not of one pure blood, but of a well-mixed plasma cocktail of Ainu, Mongol, Manchu, Malaysian.
They're really laid on thick here, Jesus.
History of Japan, historians say
I don't think the
somewhere around
Malaysian
15th
thing is even
era,
true.
They elevated to leadership a chief or high priest, in this case the emperor, who claimed to have an inside track with the gods. This evolved into Shintoism. The emperor's son myth became the dominant religion. But the early emperors had little political power, for the islands were really divided into many independent and quarrelsome tribes, ruled over by powerful barons or daimyos. These daimyos each had large, well-paid private armies of warriors called samurai. The samurai were the important and privileged class, real aristocrats who lived off the fat of the land without working. As a badge of rank, they wore two swords, a short sword for committing harakiri when captured or disgraced, and a large two-handed sword they fought with. With this sword, it was their privilege to lop off heads, arms, or ears of the peasants, either for practice or amusement. To further set themselves apart from the common herd, the samurai developed a code of rules for themselves called Bushido, the code of the warrior. Bushido extolled absolute loyalty to one's superior and reckless bravery in battle. But most important, Bushido not only sanctioned double dealing and treachery, but looked upon it as an art to be cultivated. It encouraged ambush. Jump a man from behind when he's unarmed and you've got a club. When he's alone and you've got a gang.
Can we
Does
pause
it?
again?
Does it do that? Like, I, to be fair, I have no idea what like Bushido actually is. But that sounds really weird. That like you'd have like this honor code and says like step number 1, like gang up on a guy who doesn't have a weapon.
Yeah. I mean, like, I've heard of Bushido before, and I know only a little bit about it, but, like, this makes me really want to, like, read more about it, because the way I've understood it previously is that it's the rough equivalent of, like, a code of knightly honor from, like, feudal Europe with, like, chivalry and all that kind of stuff. It would be shocking to me if they really just had all these, like, Machiavellian things built into, I shouldn't even use the word, but you know what I mean, like deception and treachery, and like it seems really inconsistent with the behavior of like an aristocratic class who's trying to conduct themselves in a way to put them morally above the common people or something, right? Like,
because it just seems very unlikely, because like it doesn't seem like that's the kind of thing that people would in general, no matter where you're at, be like, yeah, that's like that's awesome, that's like an honorable like thing, which almost kind of makes me wonder if like the reason they say that is to imply that like, oh, to us something that seems inherently dishonorable is actually looked upon well by the Japanese, and they don't have that sense, right? It's almost like I guess an equivalent would be to say, oh, in Bushido, it's actually seen as a good thing to, beat up puppies. And, that serves two functions, not just to say, oh, they beat up puppies, but also be like, they're the kind of people who look at a code that says beat up puppies and don't have an inherent, revulsion or reaction to that. That's very bad.
Right.
Art of treachery and the double cross. The national code of Japan.
Our double cross and treachery, the national code. What?
Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense.
The executioner's axe was for the common people. As a result, harakiri became an elaborate ceremony, a form of art that showed bravery and indifference to pain. A man's son or his best friend stood by with a big sword to chop his head off in case he lost his nerve.
It shows bravery because it's not something that a normal person would do, even in Japan, right? Like it wouldn't make sense as a display of bravery if like indifference to violence were just a normal thing.
Being the shogun meant being top dog among all the daimyos. A dictator of dictators, ruling the islands in the name of the emperor, who was kept in the background as a religious figurehead.
In the year 1592...
Well, yeah, right there, they are like, oh, well, the emperor is more of a figurehead in this respect. Well, then, like, they don't believe, like, that every Japanese person does not, believe, as this would suggest earlier, that, like, the emperor is, like, the pope plus every world leader wrapped into one with utter devotion. Like, that seems like a pretty big contradictory, a really big contradiction.
Kind of, yeah, but I think the case they're trying to make is that historically Japan was not that way, but that they developed into that. I think that's what they're trying to say.
Maybe.
Which is still wrong, but like, that's...
Hideyoshi thought he and Japan were strong enough to make their first bid to cover the world with a Japanese rule. And as they have ever since, they picked China as the first victim. Hideyoshi invaded Korea, but Chinese from other provinces came to the aid of the Koreans. The Japs were stopped, and when Hideyoshi died suddenly, the invasion was called off. But they did a complete job of plunder, taking back with them all the wealth and art they could carry. They also brought back 30,000 pickled ears and noses of Chinese and Koreans killed in battle. These they buried in what is now known as the Ear Mound in the city of Kyoto. It was around this period that something new came into the midst of this warring, bloodthirsty people. Something new and strange. In the year 1521, Magellan had sailed around the world to the Philippines. In his wake came Spanish and Portuguese missionaries who eventually visited the Japanese islands. The strange new thing they brought was Christianity, the revolutionary doctrine of peace on earth, and the equality and brotherhood of man. Here was something that dignified the lowly Japanese serfs as human beings. Soon there were some 200 churches and over 200,000 converts. The warlords became frightened. These foreign medicine men were teaching tolerance, brotherly love, peace, and even equality. So they acted.
As if these are like totally foreign concepts.
Yeah, no one in Japan had ever heard of love or peace before.
One 137 churches were destroyed at Nagasaki. All Christian converts in Tokyo were burned at the stake. Throughout the West.
Thank God we never did anything like that over here.
Right.
With that, Japan closed its doors. No one could leave Japan. No one could enter. Foreign sailors shipwrecked on their shores were tortured and beheaded. For 200 years, Japan remained completely isolated.
Just a really funny, or not funny, but a really cool historical anecdote. This period of isolation, when it was broken by, I don't remember the name of the guy, but it's basically some U.S. admiral shows up with a bunch of ships with guns. It's like, open the country so we can sell you shit. Very American. But when he went to come to negotiations, he was able to speak with some people that spoke English pretty well. And this was a big mystery. What happened? And it's the most insane story of all time. Like, it's the kind of thing that you would not believe if it was in, like, some movie. You'd be like, that's total bullshit.
I haven't heard this before. I'm eager to hear the story.
Yeah, there's this guy called Ranald MacDonald, who is the son of a Scottish banker and a Native American woman on the west coast of America, who, just for no reason, just became obsessed with Japan. He was like the first weeb. And this was at a time when Japan had been, their borders were closed for, I think at this point, many, many years, and they were going to continue to be closed for a while still. But he was determined. He signs up with a whaling ship in the Pacific, and after a couple of years, convinces the captain to let him go in a rowboat near the coast of Japan. So his plan is, I'm just going to get on a rowboat, I'm just going to land on the land of Japan, see what happens. He does this, And he's captured, almost basically immediately. And the standing policy, I believe, was to like just kill these people. But he was not killed. He was taken to the emperor's court. I believe there was some understanding at the time, because they still had some limited contact. I believe it was Nagasaki was one port where the Dutch specifically were allowed to come and trade. And they weren't they weren't 100% isolated. So they understood, there's, developments happening in the world. So they wanted him to go teach English to, I think it was a couple of people in the emperor's court, like diplomats and stuff like this. So he goes and teaches them for a couple of years, living in this country, Japan, that he had only ever heard about and is totally isolated. And then after a while, they let him go. He's able to somehow book passage back to America. He comes back, oh, guys, they actually did let me in Japan, and I taught I got to meet the emperor, and I taught his court how to speak English. And of course, no one believes him. It's like this random guy, like imagine like 100 years ago, someone says, oh, I went to North Korea, and I actually met Kim Jong-un and stuff like this, and this is before like cameras or anything, and literally no one believes him. And he dies penniless before Japan opens back up, and it's only years later that people are like, how did you know how to speak English? Like the Japanese diplomats that they spoke with, they're like, oh, it was this guy, this random Scottish Native American dude from California, just showed up on our shores one day in a rowboat. And it's all completely true. Just the wildest possible story of someone who, and he was never recognized for this in his life. He died, I think, before Japan opened back up. So completely just randomly, imagine being the historian and trying to like piece this stuff together. It's wild.
Wait, so how do we know today that was true?
There are accounts of it that he made that were just totally disregarded. But after they made contact with the Japanese and started specifically asking about that, they were able, like the Japanese people were like, oh yeah, it was this man named Ranald McDonald and stuff like that. And then historians would dig and like, oh shit, there was this guy Ranald McDonald who claimed that he went to Japan and taught the emperor, but no one believed him at the time.
That is a crazy story, yeah.
Yeah, let me see here. Yeah, Ranald McDonald, February 3rd, 1824 to August 24th, 1894, was the first native English speaker to teach the English language in Japan, including educating, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this, Inosuke Moriyama, one of the chief interpreters to handle the negotiations between Commodore Perry and the Tokugawa shogunate. Yeah.
Do you have any idea, like, why they didn't kill him and why they wanted him to stay?
Let's see, blah, blah, blah. Restless man. He soon quit his bank job, decided he would visit Japan, knowing the strict isolationist policy, which meant death or imprisonment for foreigners. He signed on as a sailor to the whaling ship Plymouth in 1845 and 1848. He convinced the captain of Plymouth to set him to sea on a small boat off the coast of Hokkaido. On July 1st, he came ashore on Rishiri Island and pretended that he had been shipwrecked. He was caught by Ainu people who remitted him to the daimyo of the Madusame clan. He was then sent to Nagasaki, the only port allowed to conduct a limited trade with the Dutch. Since more and more American British ships have been appearing in Japanese waters and no man in Japan spoke English with any sort of fluency, 14 men were sent to study English under MacDonald. These men were samurai who had previously learned Dutch and had been attempting to learn English for some time from second-hand sources, such as Dutch merchants who spoke a little of the language. The brightest of these men, a sort of language genius, was Moriyama Insoki. MacDonald stayed in confinement at Daihand, a branch temple of the Sofuku-ji in Nagasaki, for 10 months, during which he also studied Japanese before being taken aboard a passing American warship. In April of 1849, in Nagasaki, MacDonald was remitted together with 15 shipwreck survivors to Captain James Glenn on the American warship USS Prebley, which had been sent to rescue stranded sailors. Glenn later urged that a treaty should be signed with Japan, quote, if not peaceably, then by force, end quote. Upon his return to North America, MacDonald made a written declaration to the U.S. Congress explaining that Japanese society was well policed and the Japanese people were well behaved to the highest standard. He continued his career as a sailor. After traveling widely, MacDonald returned to Canada East, now Quebec, and in 1858 went to the colony of British Columbia, where he set up a packing business in the Fraser River goldfields and later in the Caribou in 1864. He also participated in the Vancouver Island exploring expedition. Although his students had been instrumental in negotiations to open Japan with Commodore Perry and Lord Elgin, he found no real recognition of his achievements. His notes of the Japanese adventure were not published until 1923, 29 years after his death. He died a poor man in Washington State, 1894, while visiting his niece. His last words were reportedly, "Sayonara, my dear, sayonara."
Wow, so like, I wonder what the American attitude was toward the Japanese at that time, right? Because at one point we were even like allied with them in World War I. So, but I wonder if we were like allied with them, but still had all like obviously at that historical period, everybody's pretty racist, right?
Yeah, I wonder. I'm not sure the exact date, but the Russo-Japanese War would have also been a really important turning point in the opinion of Japan, as just sort of like this like random Asian country versus like a real world power to actually be contended with, the first like non-Western world power potentially.
Yeah, I want to say that's 1905, but I'll look it up. But
1904 to 1905, you're right on the money.
Nice. But yeah, it seems like a lot of the opinions about Japan that are being presented in this World War II video, I mean, maybe some of that stuff was pre-existing, but it couldn't have been the case that we just viewed them as this fanatical cult bent on world domination, right? But yet somehow we're allying with them, trading with them, and all this kind of stuff. Like,
yeah, well, especially in the opening of Japan, a lot of Americans were very instrumental as advisors in the opening up of Japan and really the westernization under the, I think the Meiji Restoration, I believe. That's the name. Yes, the Meiji Restoration. So there was definitely a much warmer relationship. Obviously Pearl Harbor, and then, the years of war really start to change that. And of course, not just Pearl Harbor, but the lead up to Pearl Harbor, which is like the American withdrawal from the Philippines and stuff like this, them attacking all these other Southeast Asian nations, which was not looked favorably upon by the U.S. at the time, because at the time we had pretty colonial ambitions in terms of influence and control over those countries.
Yeah, Japan had been at war in China for I think maybe like 10 years or so before the war in Europe started, and then the Pearl Harbor thing only I want to say it's 1942, so yeah.
Yeah, and of course the specific and the Japanese incursion into Manchuria as well was widely decried and condemned by the League of Nations at the time, when the Japanese army basically false flagged their way into invading and taking over Manchuria. Without even explicit approval from the government. Those were sort of the beginnings of the Japanese army just doing things and ignoring what the government said back in Tokyo. But yeah, so there's definitely a sort of a big shift from the attitudes of the Meiji Restoration and the opening up of Japan to when you get to Pearl Harbor, and then all the way to this video, there's a lot of souring of those I think of not just the relationship of the countries, but the view of the American people on Japan and the Japanese people.
Yeah, for sure. I just looked up Pearl Harbor. It's 1941. Yeah.
Okay.
And in those 200 years, the world advanced more than it had in the previous 1,000 years. Voltaire lived, and Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, Pasteur. The Americans fought a revolution for the belief that all men were created equal.
Yeah, not really.
Liberty, equality, and fraternity. The power of steam was discovered, and the steamboat and steam engine began to narrow the oceans and continents. The telegraph was invented. China was opened up to the trade of the world. But during all this time, Japan was closed. No news reached her shores. She remained a nation blacked out from the rest of the world, still living in the Middle Ages. Then, in 1853, just 92 years ago, Commodore Perry's American fleet of 4 ships sailed into Yokohama, bearing a message from President Fillmore offering the hand of friendship and the interest of trade.
To be clear, this was basically like them showing up with like guns and artillery that vastly outstripped what the Japanese had, and being like, you really need to open this or there's going to be trouble. It was not a hand of friendship, as this is being claimed.
Yeah, it was coercive.
These warlords woke with a shock from their 200 years of self-imposed isolation. They realized that the hairy white barbarian had machines and weapons that made him powerful.
Jesus.
If the sons of heaven were to rule the earth, their spears and swords would be of little avail. Also, they realized how weak and divided they really were compared to Western nations. Hastily, the feuding barons stopped fighting among themselves and joined together. But they needed a central figure around whom they could rally.
Well, That was the end result, but there was a lot of internal conflict over the Meiji Restoration. If you've highly recommend if anybody hasn't seen the movie The Last Samurai, does a very good job of not being perfectly historically accurate to the events, but giving you a very good overview of like what the vibe was essentially of this modernization.
Available was the God Emperor, who up to now had been more or less of a stooge. So, in 1868, the warlords did away with the position of shogun and elevated Emperor Meiji to supreme dictatorship over all Japan, reserving for themselves and themselves alone the right to speak for him and to guide his policy, a position the warlords have hung on to ever since. Now for a strong military. The paid warriors, the samurai, were too few for a national army. So they introduced another revolutionary idea into Japanese life. The sons of peasants were suddenly permitted the great privilege of bearing arms. And it was a great privilege, for being a soldier almost meant being a noble.
I don't think this is quite accurate either, if we pause for a second. Like, I think it's true that they did not have some kind of like nationalized army before that, but I'm pretty sure the different like feudal states within Japan did have like peasant armies, and that they were not just constantly, fighting each other with tiny numbers of samurai.
Yeah, that is my understanding as well, but it's not an understanding that it's not a very deep understanding, so I could be wrong on that front.
Yeah, it's just, this is a claim that I'm like 90% sure this is wrong, but yeah.
My understanding is that there was... Man, I really need to stop saying that so much. My understanding... as opposed to something I'm saying that isn't my understanding. I'm pretty sure that it was the case that they had armies that much more resembled like more classical, I should say classical, that refers to the classical age, but they didn't have standing professional armies in the way that many other nations had at this time. I think that is the true, that for the most part they did not have standing professional armies.
Yeah, and in the West, it was only in the Napoleonic era that the Western countries started to have those. So it's not terribly surprising for that I don't know, that Japan wouldn't, but yeah.
Enforced emperor worship, military glorification, and fanatic thoughts of conquest to be preached by all Shinto priests. Thus, Japan rid herself of the old samurai, but their fanatical spirit was passed on to the new peasant soldier, Bushido code and all. The warlords now flung open their doors to the West. Posts and telegraphs were introduced, railroads, the European calendar, photography, European dress. A frenzy of modernization seized upon the land. With a politeness such as the world has seldom seen, the Japanese invited other nations to help them build up their military power. And always with the thought, treat with the foreigner, learn his weapons, and then use them to destroy him. The old Bushido double cross. The English, having the best navy in the world, were invited to build up and train the Japanese navy. The French, supposed to have the best army in the world, were invited to train the Japanese army. But when they saw the French defeated by the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, the Japanese switched to German advisors for their army. From the English and the Americans, they borrowed the outward forms of democracy, the ministers and their representative body, the Diet. But this was all a cruel joke, for the Army and Navy cabinet ministers, still actually descendants of the old feudal barons, are above and beyond any lawmaking body. They have direct access to the emperor and can entirely bypass the civil government. In fact, whatever Japan took from the West or the Chinese, the warlords never took the moral or ethical principles that went with them. All modern knowledge that has come to the Japanese people...
The very moral and ethical principles that guided Western armies in the early 20th century and late 19th century.
Yeah, and about the moral and ethical principles that the West was practicing during World War II in particular. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny. I mentioned The Last Samurai earlier, which is a movie that sort of covers the events of American advisors going to Japan in this period and training their new army. The backstory is literally of them doing a massacre of Native Americans that haunts the main character of like, oh my god, I can't believe I did this. Like he's a total alcoholic to try and forget about it. Yeah, it's just very one-sided.
All culture, all ideas, all thinking has been filtered through to the people from the top down. Any new idea is first tried out by the ruling classes, changed to suit their purpose, then with the emperor's blessing handed down to the people as divine law. In our Western civilization, practically all the ideas, the forces that have changed our thinking have come from the bottom up. Evolution.
I don't know about that.
This is like not true at all.
Evolution is handed down to the people. Japan was westernized by decree, not by popular desire. In spite of westernization, everyone in Japan still rules over his inferior and in turn bows down to his superiors just as they did in the Middle Ages. Women have the least standing of all. They must obey the males in all things. Even today, there isn't any moral right or wrong in Japan. Merely, are you or are you not obedient to your superiors? For instance, today, a father still has the power to sell his daughter when she is 11 or 12 to a factory or a mill. She will eat, sleep, and go to school in the factory, but all her earnings will go to her father. Or if she is a little...
Man, I don't know, but like, what were child labor laws like in 1940s America? I genuinely don't know, but maybe they're a lot better than my assumptions are suggesting to me right now.
Yeah, so like basically it was a few decades before this when America was really like abolishing all the child labor stuff. Like in the late 1800s America, this same thing would have been true, that families were just like having their 11-year-olds work all day in a factory or whatever. But like after the kind of the Gilded Age was like at the close of that was when they were kind of doing all the beginnings of child labor law and kind of replacing it with public education. So really, like, even if what they're saying here about Japan is true, it's not terribly surprising. But all that it really would mean is like, okay, these people like are a couple decades behind the United States on this particular issue. And if we're going to say that they have no morals because of it, then I don't know what that says about us.
I mean, that would map on perfectly to the idea, to the very true facts about sort of the modernization of Japan during the Meiji Restoration and industrialization. I mean, and I believe that child labor is, or I guess the way I would put it is that it would certainly seem historically that it's very typical for child labor laws to really start to come into question right around when you start industrializing. So yeah, that doesn't seem like any sort of like uniquely bad mark against Japan in contrast to America or the West.
Yeah, not particularly.
Older, and he needs money, the father can sell her outright to a geisha house or house of prostitution. And modernization has done even less for the standard of living. Individual welfare still doesn't count. This comfort is supposed to be a divine virtue. And that's why the people of Japan all work as long as they can, and as soon as they can, and as hard as they can. For they, too, consider themselves as soldiers with a divine mission. These women beat the earth in humble rhythm just as they did 1,000 years ago. These women work day after day, month after month in the rice fields, human machines producing rice and soldiers. Over their heads fly the latest planes to the wars.
We're just calling them human machines. That's great.
But these farmers work and live and eat like they did in the 17th century. The income for the whole family as high as $150 a year and as low as $16 a year. The Jap peasant works harder, eats less, and pays more taxes than any other peasant on earth. But he seldom complains, for he is carrying out the divine will of the emperor. The white-collar Japanese in the daytime uses telephones and adding machines. But when he goes home, he puts on a kimono and lives as his ancestors did in the Middle Ages. Japanese houses have no foundations. There are no walls as we know them. No windows, no paint, no varnish, no curtains, no chairs, and no beds. To sleep, they spread a couple of quilts on the floor with no sheets and lay their heads on hard, round pillows. Their food lacks albumin, fats, and sugar. The standard of living is the same as it was hundreds of years ago, one of the lowest on earth. For Japan became industrialized not to raise the standard of living, but to prepare for conquest. This man in the factory doesn't work a 6-day, 48-hour week for good wages. He works a 72-hour week at starvation wages and frequently dies of tuberculosis at the age of 40.
Why do Japan's millions accept their fate in dumb, regimented silence? Why don't they rebel?
Jesus.
Organize labor unions? Well, first of all, having dedicated their lives to the Emperor, belief in Japan's divine mission to conquer runs through the whole people. This makes practically all of them willing prisoners of a vicious, ironclad social structure, a system of regimentation so perfect it made Hitler's mouth water.
Talking about them like they're a hive mind.
On top of the heap of this social structure are leaders of the Army and Navy, the warlords who surround the Emperor. They are Japan's first team. Nearly equal in power are the half-dozen super-rich industrial aristocratic families who own the wealth. They're the second team. And they play ball with the military rulers because the warlords give them cheap, uncomplaining labor and lush profits. And they, in turn, provide the money for the war machines. Next in line are the professional politicians, who are appointed by the government as rulers over the 47 provinces. These political stooges slavishly follow orders because their jobs and their very lives depend on the whims of the Army and Navy leaders. At the bottom of the heap are the peasants and workers, the hoi polloi, the masses. To make sure the masses stay in their place, there are the police, the gendarmes, the Japanese Gestapo, and the billions of ghosts of dead Japanese ancestors who watch over every act of the living. And just in case some Japanese don't believe in ghosts, they have an efficient, unique Japanese invention, the thought police. Yes, thought police.
Was that really a Japanese invention?
No, and certainly not unique to them.
Who decides when you're thinking?
Yeah. What does 1984 come out?
Thought police decides.
In 1948.
About 10,000 people a year are
3 years after
thinking
this.
bad, selfish, dangerous thoughts.
Wow, I guess George Orwell was really following Japanese contemporary politics.
To keep the aristocrats and government officials from straying from the straight and narrow Japanese line, there is another strictly Japanese invention. Secret organizations like the dreaded Black Dragon Society.
Yeah, never heard of a secret organization in the West. Never
Yeah.
happened.
Was headed by one of the world's most sinister characters, Mitsuru Toyama, chief of Japan's Murder Incorporated, sometimes called the unofficial emperor. 90 years old when he died in 1944, this dreaded master murderer held the threat of death over everyone in Japan who dared oppose the warlords too strongly. 1930. Premier Hamaguchi shot down at his desk. 1932. Prime Minister Inukai. Finance Minister Inouye. Baron Takuma Dan, head of the House of Mitsui. 1936. 4 political leaders killed. Prime Minister escapes. Brother-in-law shot by mistake. But the main reason the warlords have been able to maintain their vicious grip on Japan lies in the educational system. Education is compulsory in Japan. 97% of the Japs are literate. But the Japanese school is not an institution for the development of the mind. It is a government-controlled institution designed to teach only officially selected facts and officially approved ideas.
Isn't that true of every public education
Is
system?
to mass-produce students who all
No, only the Jap. Yeah, but our education is teaching the truth, Cricket.
Right.
Ours is the good one.
necessary to make the student an obedient, loyal subject of the divine.
I think they're complaining about propaganda in a propaganda
How
film.
to do things. Their minds absorb the official lessons like a sponge absorbs water, and like a squeezed sponge, they give back the same water. Teachers are trained only by the government, and only those fanatically loyal to the emperor are allowed to teach. Here are some of the divine thoughts that are hammered home every day.
Our lives will become sincere and true only when they are offered to the emperor and the state. Our race has before it a great ideal, a great commission to assimilate the earth and the universe.
Thus, from childhood, the Japanese are taught they are descendants of gods, a race apart and superior to all others, born for only one purpose, to dedicate their lives to the emperor. The cardinal virtue, obedience to superiors. The cardinal ambition, Hako Ichiu, to cover the earth under a Japanese roof. That is, briefly, the social structure of Japan. That is the vicious system of political and religious regimentation that hammers, kneads, and molds the whole population until it becomes an obedient mass with but a single mind.
Yeah, and again, all of this is sort of logically trying to reinforce the idea that you shouldn't view them as a population of individuals, but as one cohesive thing which is dedicated to one specific purpose. There's no room for a good right. It's very similar to that line you pointed in the German one. Are there good Germans? Perhaps, but they would need to prove it first. Damn.
Yeah, and I think they're not even leaving that much room for doubt with Japan, right? They're just saying,
yeah, they're not even bothering to say perhaps there are good Japanese.
Yeah.
1894, the warlords thought they were ready for their first modern test of strength. As usual, their first move was against China. The process was simple. You send your armies over and attack. The Japs got the island of Formosa.
This is Taiwan.
On February 8, 1904, the Japs stepped into the Big League. Without warning, they attacked the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. 3 days later, they remembered to declare war. By defeating Russia, they
This was not just a random attack without warning.
Yeah, I was about to say.
The Japanese were delirious. They had arrived.
There was a long-standing territorial dispute between them.
And 6 years later, in 1910, they simply marched in and annexed Korea. In 1914, during the First World War, the Japanese, correctly figuring the Allies would win, declared war on Germany, took the Shantung Peninsula from the Germans, and grabbed off the German-owned Marshall, Caroline, and Mariana Islands.
This octopus imagery is exactly the same imagery that Great Britain was depicted.
Yep.
Like the Germans used to depict Great Britain as an octopus with its tentacles all over the world and stuff.
I think Americans sometimes depicted this way too.
Yeah.
And declared them taboo to all foreigners. Hako Ichiu was coming true. The Japs couldn't seem to make mistakes. They won every war in the field and in politics. Every time they tangled with the West, they got new territory. The warlords grew more popular than ever. In 1927, one of them, Baron Giichi Tanaka, made out a secret modern blueprint to achieve this mad dream and handed it to the emperor. It is called the Tanaka Memorial, Japan's Mein Kampf. It was a simple plan, but carefully thought out. To cover the earth with a Japanese roof, the Japs had first to conquer Asia. To conquer Asia, they needed manpower and raw materials. China had the manpower. Manchuria had iron and coal. So Manchuria would be first, then China. The next step was Siberia with its vast resources of timber, coal, wheat, and metals. Then south into Malaysia and the East Indies with its fabulous empire of tin, oil, and rubber. The United States was the last step. And when the orange groves of California and the cotton fields of Alabama were part of Japan's empire, when the factories of Los Angeles and Detroit were producing for Japan's war machine, then the rest of the world would fall like a ripe plum, and the Japs would have fulfilled Jimu's divine commandment to cover the 8 corners of the world with a Japanese roof. That was the plan, the blueprint, the specifications for world conquest. But the Japanese are careful people. There was much to do. Many details to prepare at home and abroad before putting the plan into action. First, make sure of the home front, for in spite of every conceivable method of thought control, certain Western ideas were seeping into Japan, especially among city people. So Western music was banned. Instead, the government approved this. Western dancing was forbidden. Western movies were thrown out, and the people were made to see pictures of their ancient war heroes. Musicals began singing the praises of the Axis. Western card games were purged in favor of this. It's a game of super chess called Go. Actually, it is a game of military strategy. Western books and magazines not in accord with Japanese militarism were banned. Instead, these books were declared official reading. If We Fight by Admiral Shinsaku Hirata.
The attack on Hawaii must be the first battle in the War of the Pacific Ocean. If one snatches away the enemy's pluck in the first battle, the American Navy will certainly become wearied in the wind of panic. Therefore...
Can we pause for a second? I wonder if the people who are narrating these things, like, it sounds like an American imitating a Japanese accent, but I don't want to necessarily jump to that conclusion because I suppose it's conceivable that this is that it was narrated by a Japanese person whose second language is English and who was just sympathetic to the propaganda, but I don't really know.
American Policies by Kawashima Seichiro.
We can land in the Puget Sound and Columbia River, the vicinity of San Francisco, and the vicinity of Los Angeles. But this is possible only after we have destroyed the American fleet.
Baseball was becoming Japan's national sport. It was popularized in Japan by visiting American teams. In 1931, an all-star team led by Lou Gehrig, Al Simmons, and Lefty Grove played in Tokyo to standing room only. The warlords became afraid of baseball and tried to stop it. And when later on, Babe Ruth was brought over by a Tokyo newspaper publisher, the Hatchetmen acted. One night, the newspaper publisher was found butchered to death. To try to take the place of baseball, the rulers encouraged the old Shinto-approved sports like sumo, kendo, and judo. Judo, or jujitsu, is the act of giving in, making your opponent lose his balance, then trip him, choke him, hit, chop, poke, or kick his vital spots. The way of gentlemen, it's called. Jap diplomats think in terms of judo. For example, make an offer of peace just before you intend to attack. Kendo means the way of the sword. There's no defense in kendo. It's all offense. You either kill or are killed.
Completely implausible, I think, for any martial art.
Thinks in terms of kendo. Sumo, or Japanese wrestling, is the act of calmly waiting or stalling for time. Then a swift charge to overcome your opponent. The Japanese people think in terms of sumo. Calm, peaceful, serene, like their volcano Mount Fuji, with violent eruptions of brutal passions in between.
Kind of similar to the whole German cycle of phony peace and war, very much trying to set up the idea that, like, oh, they may look nice, but, you can't trust them.
Yeah, it reminds me of the way that conspiracy theorists think, right? It's like, oh, the fact that the conspiracy doesn't appear to be happening is evidence that it is happening.
Yeah.
But even as they hammered their home front into shape, the gentlemen of Japan were softening up the rest of the world for their Tanaka plan. To every country marked for conquest, they sent their agents. Army officers posing as laborers, shopkeepers, gardeners. Along the coasts, Officers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, masquerading as fishermen, piloted tiny boats equipped with diesel engines and radio sending sets. They fished for pearls off the South Pacific Islands. They fished for tuna off the coast of California. They made some good hauls. Other Japanese traveled widely as tourists, photographing the sights of Honolulu and Seattle. Something to show the folks back home. Still others went to work in barber shops.
How dare they do normal stuff?
All this information was collected, studied, filed away in Tokyo, ready for use when the day came for the army to go into action. Wherever Japanese spies went, Japanese propaganda followed, especially in Asia. The message was simple.
The white man is exploiting you. Drive him out. Asia for the Asiatics. Japan is your protector.
Meanwhile, to finance the war machine, the second team, the industrialists, started their briefcase offensive. From the factories of Osaka, the mills of Tokyo, the chemical plants of Nagoya, the steel mills of Iwata, the shipyards of Nagasaki, came the economic bullets. But these belching factories in the cities were not the real machinery behind Japan's trade war. For here was the real machinery. The slums of the cities, where 64% of Japan's products were made in small backroom factories employing 5 people or less. There are hundreds of thousands of these factories in the home where father, mother, and children work in semi-slavery. Taking advantage of these low labor costs, the industrialists of Japan knew they could undersell every other nation on earth, and they did. All over the world, they dumped their cheap labor products. And to their dumping, they added piracy. Countless patented articles were manufactured and sold throughout Asia under their American names. The 2 best-known American spark plugs. Genuine old Scotch whiskey was made in the distilleries of Osaka. Matches made in Kobe were labeled made in Sweden. They undersold silk to the silk-producing Italians. They undersold England's cotton goods in the home of her own cotton industry. They undersold beer to the beer-producing Germans.
Funny because America forcefully had Japan open up so we could do this exact thing to them.
Yeah.
American toothbrushes, retailing at 35 to 50 cents each, were copied in Japan to retail in American chain stores.
This part, as far as I know...
Not the toothbrushes.
This part, as far as I know, really was true, and it was kind of critical to the rebuilding of their economy after the war.
Did they in turn buy automobiles, ice boxes?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a whole period of American history that everyone just forgot about, where all the ways in which people talk about China now, they did talk about Japan like the 90s, of this rising economy that's going to overtake us, anxiety about, them becoming, the world's biggest economy and stuff like this, and that our companies couldn't hack it against them, and the need for maybe protectionism or some sort of like trade war. I mean, that stuff was all over the place back in the day, and everyone just forgot about it.
Yeah, well, the 90s specifically, because that's right after the Cold War ended, and we got to have somebody to be afraid of, right? So.
Did they erect better homes for the Jap workers or improve their living conditions? No, indeed. Instead, they imported oil, scrap iron, tin, rubber, aluminum, and secretly built up their powerful war machine. A fanatic nation turning its sweat into weapons for conquest. Sweat for guns.
Yeah, no other country has ever done that or anything.
Sweat for ships. Sweat for war.
greatest weapon made in Japan was the first team product, the Japanese soldier. As iron ore is melted in furnaces to remove impurities, so in Japan, humanitarian impurities are burned out of the child. As the steel is shaped by beating and hammering, so is the boy hammered and beaten into the shape of the fanatic samurai. Final product, the Japanese soldier. Ready to shoot, smash, and slug Jap superiority into all non-Japanese people. And so on September 18th, 1931, the first team kicked off. The warlords, faithfully following the Tanaka Plan, launched their shooting war in Manchuria. Co-prosperity, enlightenment, justice, truth, peace, peace, peace.
I'm really surprised they don't have any sort of translation for this. I guess I just expect the imagery to be enough.
I wonder if they worried that by translating this they would undercut the message of, you know...
Maybe.
Because it might appear to be less sinister than what they'd like to present, or it might be the case that it's going to make this video look hypocritical, right? Because it's like, oh, they're just doing the same kind of propaganda that we're doing.
This March of Death is a lasting monument to the insane arrogance and brutality of the Japanese soldier. Burning with malaria, racked with diarrhea and dysentery, the men, barely able to stand, were marched for some 7 days without food or water. Their helmets were purposely knocked off to expose them to the blistering sun. For hours at a time, they were given the torturing sun treatment. At night, they were packed into enclosures so tight, the men lay in their own human defecation. In the daytime, they marched in the sun. Thousands dropped out and were bayoneted and shot. Those that made it to the prison camps were subjected to unspeakable humiliation and torture. 3 years later, when rescued by MacArthur, this is how they looked.
Can we pause for a second? Yeah, so like, I do worry a little bit that the way we've been talking about this video so far kind of comes across as if we're doing apologia for Imperial Japan, but in case there's any doubt about that, no, I do not want to be doing apologia for Imperial Japan. They did a lot of really horrific shit, and here they are, you know, showing the way that they treated American POWs, and that's the least of it, right? If we were to, you know, if they were to show footage of some of the stuff that happened in China or in Southeast Asia, it's just mind-blowing, you know, destruction and cruelty.
Imperial Japan, I think, deserves to be viewed in the exact same light as like the Third Reich in terms of the level of horrendous human rights violations on a scale that previously had been unattainable, sort of the industrialization of these atrocities. A really interesting statistic is that I think it's 1 in 33 German POWs died in captivity. About for every 33 POWs the Germans took, 1 died. For Japan taking POWs, it was 1 in 3. There are just appalling conditions, even by the standards of war, that Japan subjected foreign soldiers they captured to, in ways that were above and beyond what the conduct of other nations were. The Imperial Japan, both the army and the navy, deserve to be remembered in the same light as, like, you know, the Wehrmacht, who, you know, were complicit in the Holocaust, in my opinion.
Yeah, so really, I think we're on board with the general idea of what this propaganda video is trying to do, and the German one to a lesser extent as well. It's like, I think we were right to go to go try to militarily defeat them and to have I don't know, some form of ideological encouragement to do so, right? It just, the part that really bothers me is when they take it to like essentializing the entire nation of Japan or Germany as if it were nothing but a war machine.
And particularly with this Japan one, the way in which they essentialize it is very racialized as well. The way in which they talk about, you know, the blood mixture of the Japanese, of all the different tribes that invaded the islands, or the way in which they talk about that every single Japanese is fanatically devoted in this way. There's no room left for, like, a good Japanese person. And I think that's very intentional, the way they sort of are intellectually building this case. And honestly, it reminds me of, like, almost like a Richard Spencer type dialogue, where it's very much like the logical, trying to like logic out like why you should be racist.
So I agree. It is like pretty racist by today's standards. Honestly, I expected it to be worse than it is. And this is because I've seen a couple of other World War II propaganda videos. Like, have you ever seen the Disney cartoons from this era? Yeah. It's like Donald Duck pretending to be a Japanese soldier and this kind of stuff. And those are like, honestly, like 3 times as racist as this video is. It's like,
a lot of the posters as well, just the depictions, because I think that's where you get into a lot more of the just like unfiltered raw bigotry of just like, you know, these people look weird, these people look funny and are stupid and dumb and I hate them.
Right, whereas in this video you have some of that mixed in with a much more legitimate case that we need to militarily defeat these people. And yeah.
In retreating before MacArthur, the enraged Japs wantonly burned most of the city of Manila. Before our men could kill them all, the sons of heaven had bound and slaughtered thousands of helpless Filipino civilians in the inner city. Hope prosperity. peace, enlightenment. That's roughly your enemy, Japan. A nation with a tough, seasoned, fanatic army of 4 million, still practically intact. A nation that can supply 1 million new conscripts a year, willing to die in their foxholes. A nation that believes we will throw in the sponge, because they will outfight us, outlast us, outdie us. A nation hell-bent to rule the world, or commit national suicide. Defeating this nation is as necessary as shooting down a mad dog in your neighborhood.
Jesus.
With only a portion of our total strength, we have already cracked Japan's outer defense. General MacArthur has brilliantly retaken the Philippines and cut their supply lines to the Indies. The trifibious power attack to retake Corregidor was the payoff that thrilled the hearts of Corregidor's gaunt American and Filipino defenders of 1942. Our Marines topped their glorious fighting history by killing 20,000 Japanese on Iwo Jima. On Okinawa, we trapped and destroyed over 100,000 of their best troops. Our Navy has sent to the bottom approximately 3/4 of their naval strength. Our submarines and air forces have sunk millions of tons of their shipping. From the airfields near Japan, paid for in American blood, our air forces are systematically blasting Jap factories and war plants. Now that the nasty gangsters have been blown apart, now we can concentrate the full fury of our total power on Japan. The power of a navy bigger than all other navies combined.
It's funny that, can we pause for a second? They have to strike this weird balance of making it look like these people are terribly dangerous and yet we can easily crush them. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like,
No, yeah, that's a very common, it's like, it's Schrodinger's, like, Jew, oh, the Jews are these, weak, disgusting people that have a worldwide cabal that dominates everything, and, we need to stop them. They're an existential threat. These kinds of contradictions, I think, are actually very common in, like, lots of forms of bigotry.
yeah.
An air force greater than all other air forces combined. The power of the best equipped and hardest hitting army the world has ever seen.
going to destroy Japan's armies, Japan's navy, Japan's air forces, Japan's war factories, Japan's whole power to wage war.
This makes me really curious to see if we could find any propaganda videos from the other side. Like if there are English translations of Japanese propaganda videos demonizing the United States or something. I don't know if such a thing
really interested.
exists,
Yeah.
but if we could find such a thing, would you be interested in doing that next week?
Yeah, for sure.
I want to see, like, because what I expect is it's probably really similar, but but that they're gonna tailor it specifically to like the stereotypes that the Japanese would have about Americans rather than the other way around, and like specifically to the values of their audience, which are gonna be like largely similar to the values of people in any other country, but with some cultural differences. It's gonna. Oh, it does exist. Okay.
We got at least one here. I'm curious. Is this translated? Yeah, that's a no. That's a definite no.
Is it? I wonder. Can you put closed captions on it?
A Japanese auto-generated and then auto-translate.
Can we?
You know, you can. It's usually really scuffed though. Let's see. Oh, hello?
It just doesn't appear to be working.
Oh, hold on. Robots.
Oh! Whoa! Success! Okay, so I guess this is probably what we should do next week. If maybe if we could even find more than one of these.
Yeah, no, we are still in this battle. Okay, that's actually pretty coherent. No. It's... Wow, so based on the instep part, as long as there is a big spirit of the suspension report, I don't want to throw a boot solo. Who would?
Yeah, this is like incomprehensible almost.
Yeah.
I guess I'll I'll try if you're interested to see if we can find ones that do have workable translations, or that we can, I don't know, somehow do it. But I don't know. Do you have any other comments that you want to make on the German and Japanese videos that we just watched?
No, I mean, I think that was basically everything. They're really interesting to see just how different the perspectives are sometimes, especially with the German one. I thought it was really interesting. The Japanese one was, pretty much, I think, what we were expecting. Maybe not quite as bad, but mostly just a lot of racism and essentializing of the Japanese. But it's still really interesting to see just how, I think my biggest take was just how intellectualized they made it. It was very much sort of trying to make this logical case for why you should, view the Japanese people with suspicion and hostility.
Mm-hmm. Another idea, I wonder if we could find Cold War propaganda videos. I don't know, because I enjoyed doing these.
Oh, there's gotta be, right?
Yeah, I mean, those will for sure be, there will for sure be English language Cold War propaganda videos, so yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've got nothing else to add, though, on the ones we saw today. We pretty much said what we've got to say.
Yeah,
but,
I'll try to do some looking. I'm driving down to California tomorrow, and I'm gonna be pretty busy over the weekend and stuff. But I'll see if there is anything I can find.
What part of California are you going to?
I think it's San Jose.
Oh, okay, never mind. Because I live in California, but that's not near me.
Okay,
Because I was
right on.
gonna say,
Okay.
like, yeah, well, whatever. I'm in Southern California, but
Okay, right on.
yeah. Well, anyway, do you want to shout yourself out before we're done?
Yeah, what's up, guys? Flowtrace. I'm here most Wednesdays when we do get the show, and hopefully very soon I'm gonna have my streaming setup finally put together and start streaming on my own channel soon enough. You can check me out twitch.tv/Flowtrace, twitter.com/Flowtrace, and I am here most Wednesdays.
Okay, and we did not get a lot of viewers today, but if anybody who did watch, I would welcome any feedback on the audio setup. I was particularly concerned with that today. Like, did everything sound good? Because I know my stream has not had good audio in the past. I'm hoping it's improved. But anyway, thank you for joining us, Flowtrace, and have a good week.
Yeah, you too, man.